Hello, my young historians. This is some information about your annotated bibliography, the one that you have due November 15th, but also in general, all about your annotated bibliography. It's a big part of your project because this is what the judges are going to see first. Even before they look at your project, they're probably going to look at your process paper, which we'll talk about in a little while, and your annotated bibliography. This is where you can show off your stuff. You can talk about analyzing your resources, and you kind of talk about the depth of your the research that you've done. Okay, so this is just a real quick overview about your bib, and then also instructions on how to print it, because there's a little trick to how to print it. So a couple things about your annotated bibliography. You want to title your annotated bibliography, annotated bibliography. It automatically does works cited in Noodle Tools, so we're going to make sure we change that. I'll show you how. Every source that you use eventually must be entered and annotated. That's when you are done with your bib in January and February. For November 15th, I want 2 annotations, just so I know that you know how to annotate your source within your bibliography. I'm going to show you how to divide your annotated bibliography into primary and secondary sources. And then eventually, if you have a documentary, you're going to have a ton of images. Your images can actually be done in a separate bibliography. We're not going to worry about that now, but I just want you to keep that out there. You're probably asking, how many sources should you eventually have? Well, you should eventually have as many sources as you need to prove a thesis. For this bibliography that's due November 15th, I believe I want 4 primary sources and 5 secondary sources, print sources, right? What you don't want to do is pad your bibliography just by adding more and more and more sources that you don't use. It's actually academic dishonesty, and it can be people can read through that pretty quickly. So only list items that you actually use, and it is true that quality sources are more impressive than a quantity of sources. So really, really good sources are much more important to use than, oh, look, I got 37 sources and my bibliography is 84 pages. Well, you just kind of wasted your time. All right, so quality over quantity. You're going to ask me, how many sources do I need, Mr. Taft? And I'm going to say as many as you need to prove your thesis. Okay? Every citation, make sure that you have an author, a title, a publisher, and a publication year. This is especially important for your YouTube resources because YouTube is not a resource. YouTube is a place you find resources. It's like a library, or it's like an online database almost. For a YouTube video to be used, you need to be able to identify the author, the title, the publisher, and the publication year. If you can't do that, it might not be a valid source. So make sure that you dig into those YouTube sources, those documentary videos, if there's an interview or something like that, because you want to make sure that you can identify where it actually came from. Some of you are using the Historical New York Times, and you'll get this big long honking link or a ProQuest link. You can get rid of any long link like that and just put where you actually got that information, like just shorten it. Okay, because these links, unless you have access or a subscription to that program or that platform, they can't even link on them anyways. So you can have that link in your bibliography as a resource so that you can access that document, but it should eventually become something like this. For your annotations, I always kind of summarize it as 3 parts, and I get this mostly from NHD. What is the source? So describe the source, and don't start everyone with, this source is a book. This source is a website. Try to adjust your writing. These are written in complete sentences, by the way. The second part I would do is, how is this source used? And third, how did the source help you understand your topic and create your project? I'm going to show you some examples of the ones that I wrote in just a second. Okay? So if you need any more details about the annotated bibliography, go to the NHD website, because that's who is really evaluating your bibs. I use their guidelines, so that's the whole deal. Why do we do the annotated bibliography? Real quick, it makes you, or real easy, it makes you analyze and support your sources, so that, because historians use really good sources, and you don't want to use garbage sources, okay? So that's why you're not putting Wikipedia into your annotated bibliography, because that's not a historical research source. You're not going to cite some other person's NHD project, because that's not an accurate source necessarily. All right, so here's some information now about how to actually organize and print your NHD bibliography, especially setting it up for the due date on November 15th. Now, it is super important that you follow directions carefully on this. There's a whole bunch of things that I'm going to show you that are important. All right. First thing I want you to do is I want you to look at my sources. Here I've got 8 sources about the Harlem Hellfighters. What I don't have is I don't have if they are primary and secondary sources. Here is how you identify if they are primary and secondary sources. Are you ready for this? It's fun. It's super easy. It's cool. You go like this. This is a letter from the first lieutenant from 1918. So this is a letter, right? It's a primary source. So I'm going to click Add Tag, Primary Source. Boom, baby. This is a primary source, another letter. I'm going to add Tag, Primary Source. There we go. This is a book, a really big book, a secondary book about the Harlem Hellfighters, but it's secondary, so I'm going to make it a secondary source. Just like that. Here's another one that's going to be secondary. Another one that's going to be secondary. This is a primary source, a collection of writings from a soldier, so I'm going to make that a primary source. And then I'll finish up these two with secondary, and this one is actually primary because it's a guy's tales. So I did all that, right? Next, I'm going to go up here and I'm going to sort by primary, secondary. It instantly did exactly what I wanted it to do. It sorts it in primary and secondary sources. Primary here, secondary here, and it keeps it alphabetized. So now I'm ready to print it. But there's a couple other things I want you to do. Okay, now watch. I want you to go to Print Export and go to Formatting Options. On your formatting options, I want you to list title, annotated bibliography. It probably shows up as works cited for you. I want you to put annotated bibliography. Make sure that it says page header, none, you don't need that. Annotation starts on a new line and includes citations and annotations. And you can remove your URLs. All right. So again, annotated bibliography, none. Annotation starts on a new line. Citations and annotations, URLs are removed. Make sure you do that. Now I'm going to close it. The next thing you're going to do now is you're going to get ready to print it. You're going to go to Print Export. I think you can just print export it to Google Docs. So I'm going to click that, and it's going to make my bibliography. Okay? Looking good? All right. Now, there's a couple things I want you to do here. Obviously, when you turn it in, you're going to put your name on it, okay? Because you're going to turn in a printed version of this. A couple things I want you to do now. I want you to, after every source, give me a return. It just helps to divide up your sources. It's also easier for me to write some comments in there. So after every source, I want you to do a return. Sound good? Also, I wouldn't mind it if you bolded every source. Okay. And by the way, you'll notice that it divided it into primary and secondary sources. There we go. Now, take a look at my annotation. I did my annotation in my Noodle Tools. I did my annotation in my Noodle tools. You can see it's right here. If you want to know where to do your annotation in your Noodle tools, okay, there's a place for annotation down here. Hopefully you'll see that my annotations are usually 3 to 4 sentences. My first sentence, it describes what the resource is. Okay. My second sentence, let me change my spelling because I didn't look at that. My second and third section or sentence talks about what I got out of the resource and how I, what the resource is discussing, and then how I used it. And in this one, it was about the tragic conditions that African Americans had to face when they were in World War I, and I thought it would provide an authentic voice for my research. That's what my primary source annotation is. So that's an example of how to do your annotation. Here's mine right here. And you'll notice that I have another one that's a secondary resource that I annotated. Okay, it's okay to use first person in that. That's fine. This is my secondary resource. And this one I just called, it's a book about a story of the 369th. It's a historical book. There's one other thing you could do. I'm not too picky about it, but I'm going to ask NHD what they think. I wouldn't mind it if we single spaced these bad boys, just because it doesn't waste as much paper. Okay? And then maybe we do a little return after the primary, a little return after the secondary. So this is what you are going to turn in on Friday, or by Friday, I should say. Notice I've got my primary sources and my secondary sources. I have at least one of each annotated. All right. I bolded, maybe I'll put another space there just to set them aside. I've got my, this starts on a new line. It just looks a little nicer. I think it reads a little better. I don't know what you guys think, but that's what I'm going with. Okay. Once I've got that ready to go, I'm going to print it, and I am going to turn it in with the rubric. All right, I want you to make sure that you are following this rubric. Of course, we're trying to hit the 3s. Okay, if you do it, you hit the 3s. All right, if you can check that box off almost. So the one thing in here I do want to mention is that you have identified and contacted at least one organization, historical site. That doesn't go in your bibliography unless you get some content information about them. So if you emailed a librarian and they sent you back a resource, you don't put that you emailed the librarian in your bibliography. You don't put that email because they're not giving you any content. They're giving you a resource that has content. However, if it's an email interview with somebody, then you would put that email into your bibliography. So what I want you to do is I want you to list or even copy any email or print any email that you have sent out to anybody that you've contacted. If it's a museum, historical society, I've mentioned some professors or history professors or political science professors. If you did a phone call, I know a couple of you called, which is great. Just tell me who you called. You can even write down and said I called so and so or whatever. Some of you have developed sort of a script that you can use for emails and phone calls. Good job. That's the best thing you can do because you can just change them around a little and keep sending them out. Okay? So, and then of course these are your process skills. One of the big things I want you to do is use guidelines and rubrics successfully. All right? Follow directions. That's pretty huge. Sound good? So this is a little bit of information for you about those NHD bibliographies. They're a big part of your NHD evaluation, and also, I mean, it's your research. It's the guts of your project. You can't have a good project without good resources. So get digging on those. Print those bad boys out, hand them to me, and I'm going to get them back to you as soon as possible. And then keep adding to your bibliography. Okay? And by the way, who's looking at this right now? It looks like Nora Markwald, Michael Schoen, and somebody else is looking at this right now. Maybe I'll say hi to them. Yes, I'm just going to go, hi, Nora and Mike. I am talking about you on my screencast. Yay! I'm sure they're going to be happy about that. All right. I'll see you guys all in school, and let me know if you have any questions, and let's get going. Let's keep pushing on this NHD thing because it's getting to the good stuff.